The ocean speaks, not in words of course, nor even in anything quite like what we might call a voice, but it speaks nonetheless. And tonight, or this afternoon, depending on your corner of the world, we're going to listen in to clicks and crackles, to pulses that roll across entire seas, and to the way the water itself becomes a messenger, faster and more fluent than you might expect. Hello there and welcome to the Sleepish Science. If you feel like sharing, I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Maybe you're horizontal in Helsinki or vertical in Vancouver. I won't judge. So before you drift into dreamland, go ahead and like and subscribe. Your future sleepy self will thank you, or at least give you a thumbs up in your dreams. Let's begin where all sound begins, in a ripple, a push, a vibration. Water, after all, has its own acoustics. Now on land we might take sound for granted, a dropped pencil, a rustling of leaves, the satisfying sheesh of a sliding drawer. All of these are familiar, intimate noises born of air, of vibrations shimmying their way through a patchwork of nitrogen, oxygen, and the occasional floating bit of toast crust, depending on your household. But underwater, the rules change. Sound becomes less a gentle traveler and more a determined sprinter. In fact, sound travels roughly 4.5 times faster through seawater than through air. The exact speed depends a bit on things like temperature, salinity, and depth, but for the sake of illustration, imagine a whale sending out a low-frequency call. That deep, rumbling note could cruise through the deep ocean at nearly 1,500 meters per second. By contrast, a shout in air dawdles along at just over 300 meters per second, practically a scenic stroll compared to sound in the sea. The physics behind this are charmingly intuitive. Once you think about them, sound is nothing more than vibration, tiny compressions and decompressions moving through molecules. The closer those molecules are to one another, the easier it is for the vibration to pass along the line, like a whispered secret among conspiratorial dominoes. Since the molecules in water are packed much more tightly than those in air, it's no surprise that they're better at nudging their neighbors. Of course, this also means that underwater, the volume knob is stuck on high. What seems faint to us in air, like the growl of an approaching cargo ship, becomes thunderous below the waves. In fact, some of the loudest natural sounds on Earth come not from earthquakes or storms, but from a curious creature known as the snapping shrimp. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's imagine sound not just as a vibration, but as a traveler. On land, this traveler is often tired. Trees, buildings, breezes, they all sap its energy. It's a bit like trying to jog through molasses while being chased by curious squirrels. But underwater, our traveler is practically given roller skates. Not only is sound faster in water, but it also travels farther. This long-distance behavior is especially dramatic at certain depths. Marine physicists refer to something called the sound fixing and ranging channel, or more poetically, the deep sound channel, located a few hundred to over 1,000 meters beneath the surface. This zone acts like a kind of natural acoustic fiber optic cable. It's where the temperature and pressure conditions conspire to bend sound waves back inward, preventing them from escaping upward or downward. As a result, low-frequency sounds can be funneled horizontally for thousands of kilometers. Back in the mid-20th century, the US Navy began exploring this phenomenon in earnest. They realized that a single explosive ping in this channel could be heard halfway across an ocean. This discovery, part of a project called So Far, a name that was either a tidy acronym or just a sleepy naval pun, revealed that the ocean itself was laced with an invisible corridor for sound. The implications, of course, were vast. Submarine detection became more sophisticated. But even more enchantingly, scientists started wondering, what if animals had discovered this sound channel long before we did? Enter the blue whale, that oceanic tuber of the animal kingdom. A blue whale's vocalizations are so low in frequency that we humans can only perceive them with the help of instruments. These deep rumbling moans, often below 20 Hz, can travel across entire basins. It's quite possible that a whale off the coast of New Zealand might be heard, eventually, by another near Chile. The ocean is their concert hall, no admission required. But how do marine creatures actually create sound? On land, we mammals tend to rely on vocal cords, vibrating tissues neatly tucked into our throats. Many marine mammals, like dolphins and whales, have modified versions of these, though in toothed whales, it's often the nasal passages that take on the heavy lifting. Air is recycled through bony chambers near the blowhole, vibrating tissues called phonic lips. The resulting clicks and whistles are then projected through fatty structures in the head, sometimes referred to as the melon, not a bad nickname, really. Fish, on the other hand, have their own repertoire. Some species use their swim bladders, those gas-filled sacs that help regulate buoyancy, as resonance chambers. By rapidly contracting special muscles around the bladder, they produce pulsing sounds that can range from the melodic to the mildly alarming. The midshipman fish, for instance, emits a love song so resonant that it has been mistaken for malfunctioning plumbing in California houseboats. Homeowners have filed complaints, only to be told by bemused biologists that the crooning culprit lives beneath the dock. Let's take a moment to appreciate just how old this phenomenon is. Sound-based communication in marine environments likely predates even the earliest vertebrates on land. Fossil evidence and molecular studies suggest that the ancestors of today's bony fish, dating back hundreds of millions of years, were already developing specialized structures for detecting and perhaps producing sound. Fast forward to today, and we find that the ocean is not quiet at all, quite the opposite. It is filled with sound, the groaning of icebergs, the crackle of geothermally active seafloors, the crackling of shrimp colonies, and the rhythmic hoots of pilot whales in family groups. In recent years, researchers like Dr. Michel André in Spain and Dr. Christopher Clark in the United States have pioneered passive acoustic monitoring, placing hydrophones across vast stretches of the ocean to simply listen. The data collected is sometimes visualized as spectrograms, colorful sound signatures that reveal the chorus of the sea. These are not always harmonious. Human noise, as we'll explore soon enough, has become one of the dominant features in certain parts of the ocean. But for now, think of the sea not as a blue silence, but as a humming network of travelers and messages. It's not unlike the internet, really, except instead of cables, we have currents. Instead of routers, we have coral reefs. And instead of usernames and passwords, we have signature whistles, territorial grunts, and frequencies as wide as a sky. And the conversations? They're endless. The mating calls of fish, the directional pulses of dolphins, the lonely calls of a solitary whale, each one etched into water, carried forward by density and patience. Even silence in the ocean, when it occurs, is full of information. A sudden drop in coral reef chatter can signal environmental stress. A lack of snapping shrimp might suggest degradation, and a previously quiet area, now alive with sound, might hint at recovery. Sound is not just a means of communication, it is a diagnostic tool, a narrative of place. It is in a way how the ocean remembers. Somewhere right now, a sperm whale is clicking in short, rhythmic bursts, a pattern that may be as unique as a name. Somewhere else, a school of damn shellfish is producing pops and pulses, coordinating their group behavior in what sounds to our ears like the crackle of static, and deep in the sound channel, a blue whale's baritone sigh is slipping silently forward, perhaps to be heard days later and oceans away. The ocean's internet has no login screen, no cookies or disclaimers, just waves and pulses and echoes between species who over millennia have learned to speak the sea. And it all begins with a simple truth. In water, sound moves. It moves with purpose. It moves with grace. And it carries always a story. If the ocean is a vast internet of sound, then whales, particularly humpback whales, are surely its poets. These titanic singers fill the sea not with utilitarian code, but with what can only be described as underwater arias, elaborate, evolving, and strangely moving. It's easy to imagine that if you could float just right, suspended in warm currents near Tonga or Hawaii, you might overhear a verse that makes you forget you have bones. Humpback whales are baleen whales, meaning they filter feed with great sheets of keratin rather than teeth. But they are also among the most acoustically gifted creatures in the sea. Only the males sing, and their songs are not short affairs. A single performance can last for 20 minutes or more, and is often repeated for hours, sometimes even throughout the night. Each song is made up of phrases that are structured into themes, and these themes unfold in a particular order, not unlike movements in a symphony. Dr. Roger Payne, who first recorded these vocalizations in the late 1960s, described the experience as something that could only be written by another intelligent life form. His early tapes, pressed onto vinyl and titled Songs of the Humpback Whale, sparked a worldwide fascination. They were even included aboard the Voyager spacecraft as part of the Golden Record, humanity's musical mixtape for the stars. One can only imagine some extraterrestrial octopus flipping through those tracks and pausing at a whale's mournful refrain. But humpback songs are not static. They change over time, evolving in a way that still puzzles researchers. In some regions, such as the South Pacific, an entire population will gradually shift their song's structure over a season. Then, a remarkable thing happens. A new theme or motif, perhaps originating near Australia, will appear thousands of kilometers away, sometimes adopted by whales off the coast of French Polynesia within a year. This eastward wave of song innovation has been studied by Dr. Ellen Garland and colleagues, who liken it to a cultural transmission, a kind of cetacean cover song that sweeps across oceans. Imagine, if you will, that whales are living in an endless jam session. One individual comes up with a new riff, perhaps a modulated groan or an unexpected squeak-trill combo, and soon it becomes all the rage. The others pick it up, add their own flourishes and pass it along. It's less Beethoven and more barbershop quartet meets ambient jazz. Scientists still don't fully understand why this occurs. Some speculate that innovation signals fitness, much like a peacock's feathers. Creativity may be a way to impress potential mates. Others think it might be the byproduct of social learning gone delightfully rogue. These songs travel impressively far, in the open sea, with few obstacles and plenty of water to carry vibrations. Low-frequency elements of the songs can journey for hundreds of kilometers. The ocean is not always cooperative. Currents, temperature layers, and ambient noise can interfere, but the general efficiency of sound transmission in water makes it an ideal medium for whale music. And the whales themselves, they're excellent listeners. Humpbacks have sensitive hearing attuned to the frequencies used in their songs, and their auditory anatomy, though quite different from ours, is built to process complex soundscapes. Unlike humans, who rely on outer ears and air-filled canals, whales hear through fat-filled cavities in their lower jaws, which conduct sound toward the inner ear. It's an elegant workaround for life underwater, and it works beautifully. There's a kind of communal beauty to it. All the singing males in a given region perform essentially the same song during a breeding season. It's as if every male humpback is participating in a synchronized sonic tapestry, with variations and flourishes, yes, but always within a shared framework. As the season progresses, the song slowly morphs, the refrain gets embellished, the rhythm shifts, a squeal becomes a growl, and the next year, the song has changed entirely. It's as though a new composition has been chosen, and everyone's memorized the sheet music. One of the more endearing moments in humpback research occurred when Dr. Michelle Fournette and colleagues noticed that certain whales, particularly younger or less dominant males, seemed to practice in quieter waters, perhaps away from the main chorus. Like bashful students in a music class, these individuals would experiment with parts of the song, slowly refining their delivery before joining the full ensemble. It's a reminder that even in the animal kingdom, performance anxiety is a thing. The complexity of these songs is not just auditory, it's cognitive. Producing and remembering a sequence of sound phrases, sometimes over 24 distinct units, arranged in predictable yet dynamic patterns, suggests a level of neural sophistication we're only beginning to grasp. Some neuroscientists have proposed that this type of learning and production engages brain structures in whales analogous to those in songbirds and humans. That would make humpback whales one of the very few animals known to exhibit vocal learning, the ability to acquire new sounds through imitation. There's even evidence, albeit limited, that humpbacks might recycle old themes years later, remixing past motifs into something fresh. A kind of greatest hits compilation, perhaps. If whales ever launch a record label, I'd subscribe. One of the more endearing moments in humpback research occurred when Dr. Michelle Fournette and colleagues noticed that certain whales, particularly younger or less dominant males, seemed to practice in quieter waters, perhaps away from the main chorus. Like bashful students in a music class, these individuals would experiment with parts of the song, slowly refining their delivery before joining the full ensemble. It's a reminder that even in the animal kingdom, performance anxiety is a thing. The complexity of these songs is not just auditory, it's cognitive. Producing and remembering a sequence of sound phrases, sometimes over 24 distinct units, arranged in predictable yet dynamic patterns, suggests a level of neural sophistication we're only beginning to grasp. Some neuroscientists have proposed that this type of learning and production engages brain structures in whales analogous to those in songbirds and humans. That would make humpback whales one of the very few animals known to exhibit vocal learning, the ability to acquire new sounds through imitation. There's even evidence, albeit limited, that humpbacks might recycle old themes years later, remixing past motifs into something fresh. A kind of greatest hits compilation, perhaps. If whales ever launch a record label, I'd subscribe. The social role of singing also seems to vary. While the most obvious context is mating, male humpbacks typically sing during the breeding season and not during migration or feeding. There's debate over whether the song directly attracts females or is more of a display between competing males. In some observations, females appear indifferent to the music, while other studies suggest that they may approach singers more often than silent males. Either way, the effort involved is staggering. A singing whale burns calories, loses feeding time, and sometimes risks attracting predators. That they do it anyway, enthusiastically, and for hours on end, speaks to its importance in their lives. One might ask, what do these songs mean? The answer is, we don't know. At least not in the way we'd decode a Morse code message or a spoken language. The songs likely don't carry discrete words or translatable sentences, but they do convey emotion, presence, and intent. They might say, I'm here, or I'm healthy, or simply, listen. And when you do listen, you can't help but feel that there's more going on than mere noise. Some researchers have speculated that these songs may serve a function even beyond courtship, perhaps helping whales navigate by echolocation or reinforcing social bonds across vast distances. Others propose that the structure and rhythm might play a meditative or self-regulatory role for the singers themselves, a kind of aquatic mantra. It's speculative, of course, but not so different from the way we humans hum to ourselves in unfamiliar or stressful places. Meanwhile, new technologies are allowing us to study these melodies in unprecedented detail. Autonomous underwater vehicles equipped with hydrophones roam silently through breeding grounds, capturing real-time data. Machine learning algorithms now help identify patterns, flag anomalies, and even predict regional song changes based on past trends. It's a curious turn, artificial intelligence decoding whale compositions that are in many ways as expressive as human music. And still, there's something ineffable about it all. When you hear a whale's song slowed down, its undulations revealed in long echoing pulses, it feels less like science and more like poetry. Not just a marvel of anatomy or behavior, but a kind of reminder that intelligence takes many forms and that expression in all its guises is older than any dictionary. So the next time you think of the sea as silent, remember the humpbacks, floating in twilight blue water, lungs full of air, mouths closed, singing into the ocean's body, not for applause, not for recognition, but simply because that is what they do, because sound carries, and so do stories, and someone, somewhere out there, might. If the humpback whale is the ocean's balladeer, then the sperm whale is its percussionist, cryptic, rhythmic, and endlessly precise. These deep-diving leviathans do not sing like their baleen cousins. Instead, they produce patterns of powerful clicks, short bursts of sound that bounce through the water like Morse code from a forgotten world. It may not sound like music to our ears, but in the language of the sea, this staccato symphony is the basis for some of the most complex social communication ever recorded in a non-human species. These clicks are not random. They come in structured arrangements known as codas, and these codas function almost like a dialect, shared among family units, clans, or even ocean-spanning communities of whales who have never met face to face. Let me introduce you to one of the foremost listeners in this world, Dr. Shane Gero, a marine biologist whose life has been delightfully interrupted by sperm whales more times than he can count. Through his long-running research project in the Eastern Caribbean, known as the Dominica Sperm Whale Project, Dr. Gero and his team have documented that different groups of sperm whales use distinct coda repertoires, essentially unique sequences of clicks that identify who they are and where they belong. But it's the social clicks, the codas, that have drawn increasing attention in the last 2 decades. Dr. Gero's collaborator, linguist Dr. David Gruber, and a team of scientists and data specialists have begun constructing what they call the Cetacean Translation Initiative, or CETI for short. Their goal is nothing less than decoding sperm whale communication, not just recognizing coders, but understanding what, if anything, they signify. Are they names, greetings, warnings, rituals? Some early patterns suggest that certain coders may be context-dependent, varying subtly based on whether the group is reuniting after a dive or socializing at the surface. Others seem tied to particular individuals. The working hypothesis is that sperm whale societies may operate with clan-level cultures, where communication helps maintain social cohesion across generations. If this sounds familiar, it should. It's not so different from our own tribal languages, stories and songs. Here's something oddly comforting. Sperm whale clans don't overlap much. They tend to avoid one another, maintaining distinct acoustic territories, where their coders remain unique. Think of them as underwater neighborhoods, with very specific doorbell chimes. This behavioral separation is a strong hint that these coders matter, not just for identity, but for social order. And these whales are indeed social. A typical Caribbean unit consists of a dozen or so individuals, mostly females and calves, who travel, rest and forage together for years. Males, once they reach adolescence, tend to wander off in solitude, returning only occasionally to breed. The females, meanwhile, form lifelong bonds, often babysitting each other's young and synchronizing dives. They surface together, exchange clicks, rub flippers, and once in a while, drift together in what scientists have described as synchronized rest, their bodies floating vertically, like pillars in an ancient cathedral. The image is mesmerizing. A pod of whales hovering like monoliths in the blue, perfectly still, perfectly aligned. No sound. Then a burst of clicks, a conversation perhaps, or a memory passed on. Sound plays another crucial role in their foraging lives. Sperm whales use echolocation, projecting those mighty clicks and listening for the echoes that bounce off squid and other prey. But their clicks aren't just loud, they are staggeringly loud. Some can reach over 200 decibels, which underwater is equivalent to standing next to a rocket engine in air. Yet somehow this acoustic force is finely tuned and directional, focused like a spotlight in the dark. The whales modulate their clicks as they approach a target, much like a bat closing in on a moth. Of course, as with all deep listening, patience is essential. Coders are brief, but their implications stretch across lifetimes. We are only beginning to scratch the surface. It's possible, even likely, that sperm whales have been carrying on rich, multi-generational conversations beneath our boats for centuries, entirely unnoticed. One researcher described it as listening to another civilization, and perhaps it is. One with no cities, no buildings, no written language, but with clans, dialects, customs, and a system of sound that marks identity and connection. If culture is the transmission of shared behavior across generations, then sperm whales may be among the most cultured beings on the planet. And what they're sharing isn't just data, it's belonging. The clicks bounce forward, echo after echo, a sonic fingerprint on the fabric of the sea. And if you could follow those clicks long enough, listen closely enough, you might just find yourself learning to think like a whale. While whales may compose the ocean's arias and symphonies, the fish are its folk singers, drummers, and experimental percussionists. They grunt and creak, pop and buzz, murmur and even croon, often in short bursts and sometimes in astonishing choruses. If you've never imagined a sea bass serenading a mate, or a toadfish thumping its swim bladder like a tiny kettle drum, well, prepare to expand your playlist. You see, the idea that fish are mostly silent is a myth, a bit like assuming birds don't talk just because you can't hear them through a closed window. In truth, fish have been producing sounds for hundreds of millions of years, and these sounds serve many purposes: courtship, defense, navigation, even plain old gossip if we're being generous with the term. Let's start with courtship, because romance, whether in Shakespeare or a shallow estuary, tends to inspire the most effort. Among the standout crooners of the sea is the plain-fin midshipman fish. This oddly charming creature, native to the Pacific coast of the Americas, has developed an acoustic love language that is as persistent as it is peculiar. The males hum, loudly, all night, for hours. This humming is produced by rapidly vibrating sonic muscles surrounding their swim bladders. It's a bit like having a built-in cello that you can bow at will. During mating season, Entire underwater coves can resonate with their collective drone, creating a soundscape that's been known to puzzle coastal residents. In fact, there have been documented complaints to city councils about mysterious humming noises at night, only to discover the culprit wasn't plumbing or aliens, but lovesick fish. Their relatives, the toadfish, are no less expressive. Oyster toadfish, for example, produce what's often described as a boat whistle call, a long tonal pulse used to attract mates. Scientists like Dr. Andrew Bass, yes, he really studies fish acoustics and is named Dr. Bass, a fact that cannot go uncelebrated, have shown that these calls are hormonally regulated and vary by individual. Toadfish are also sensitive to the calls of others, sometimes engaging in duets or competitive calling matches. Then, there are damselfish, who produce rapid clicks to ward off rivals and warn intruders. These clicks are usually generated by snapping tendons or bones near their jaws. It's not quite the sound of a drum solo, but in the underwater arena, it gets the point across. Likewise, clownfish, yes, the same ones that inspired Pixar fame, produce popping sounds during social disputes within their group hierarchy. That cheery orange and white fish, it's also something of a disciplinarian. If you're wondering how fish hear these messages, the answer lies in their lateral line system and inner ear structures. Most fish don't have external ears, but they possess pressure-sensitive cells that detect vibrations through water. Many also have structures known as otoliths, small bones in the inner ear that respond to movement and sound waves, providing a kind of internal seismograph. Some species, like herring and catfish, even have adaptations that enhance their hearing range, including connections between their swim bladders and inner ears. Speaking of herring, they're responsible for one of the more unexpected entries in marine acoustics, the so-called fast repetitive tick, or FRT. It's a series of high-frequency bursts that scientists believe may be produced by expelling air from the anal duct. In plainer terms, herring may communicate with flatulence. Now that's a punchline worthy of its own underwater stand-up set. But researchers from institutions like the University of British Columbia have actually explored this in earnest. FRTs may serve as a spacing mechanism within large schools or help maintain nighttime group cohesion. So yes, your childhood suspicion that farts could be functional has at least one scientific point in its favor. In Australia's Great Barrier Reef, scientists have recorded massive dawn and dusk choruses among reef fish. Similar to the way birds sing at sunrise, these gatherings involve group vocalizations from dozens of species, each using its own acoustic signature. Parrotfish may rasp as they feed, while groupers grunt and snap a rattle. These reef soundscapes are not only beautiful, they're biologically essential. They help maintain territories, coordinate spawning events, and signal changes in environmental conditions. Dr. Eric Parmentier, a Belgian biologist specializing in fish acoustics, has catalogued hundreds of species that use sound in specific, often surprising ways. His team has found that some species emit distress calls when captured, leading predators to swoop in and startle the original threat, effectively using sound as a decoy. Others, like the croaker family, synchronize their calls during spawning in enormous offshore aggregations that can be picked up by hydrophones miles away. Croakers are particularly fascinating in this regard. In the Gulf of Mexico, for example, the black drum, a member of the croaker family, produces deep resonant booms that vibrate through the seafloor. Some describe it as the sound of distant thunder, others liken it to a bass drum under your feet. These calls help females locate males in murky waters where visual cues are limited, and they offer a rare chance to observe fish courting across vast distances. Acoustic communication isn't just for the romantic or territorial either. Some fish use it to warn others of predators, to signal feeding opportunities, or to maintain social cohesion within schools. In the case of the bigeye, a deep-water species, clicks may help keep the group together in near-total darkness. It's sonar for the social set. Technological advances have helped us understand this underwater chatter in more detail. Hydrophones, underwater microphones capable of detecting a wide frequency range, are now deployed in diverse environments from shallow estuaries to the deep sea. In some cases, artificial intelligence is being used to pass through hours of recordings, isolating species-specific sounds and identifying behavioral patterns. One experiment, conducted by Dr. Lucia Dirio and colleagues in the Mediterranean Sea, revealed that boat traffic can dramatically reduce fish vocal activity. In the presence of motor noise, many species simply stop calling. Others shift their frequencies or timing, trying to be heard, a behavior eerily similar to what urban songbirds do when competing with city noise. It's one more reminder that our presence, even when we're not looking, reshapes the lives of animals trying to be heard, and sometimes even our science gets upstaged. In a coral reef near Indonesia, a research team was monitoring fish acoustics when a pod of dolphins swam by, momentarily overwhelming the hydrophones. The fish fell silent. For a few minutes the reef held its breath, as though pausing to listen. Then, after the dolphins moved on, the pops and hums and crackles resumed, not as an imitation, but as a kind of resilient defiance. The fish would keep speaking as they always had. That moment, I think, says something about the whole project of listening to the ocean. The fish may not have ballads or baritones, but they have beats, they have patterns, they have signals passed from one generation to the next, teaching younglings when to call and how to respond. For them, sound is survival, sound is community, and in the grand aquatic band, they're not just background players, they're keeping time. Just beneath the surface, nestled in the crannies of coral reefs and rocky shelves, is a world that sounds less like the soothing hush of the sea, and more like someone frying bacon on an open skillet. Snap, crackle, pop, welcome to the reef's rush hour, brought to you by snapping shrimp, croaking gobies, rustling wrasses, and a cacophony of aquatic neighbors that have turned underwater life into a ceaseless acoustic affair. Snapping shrimp, sometimes called pistol shrimp, though no pistols are involved, unless you count their sonic firepower, are the principal architects of this soundscape. These tiny crustaceans, typically just a few centimeters long, possess an oversized claw that works like a biological slingshot. With one rapid motion, they snap the claw shut, creating a high-velocity jet of water. This jet in turn forms a cavitation bubble that collapses with a sharp pop, reaching sound levels loud enough to stun prey and confuse predators. And yes, loud enough to interfere with submarine sonar equipment, much to the chagrin of naval officers everywhere. The bubble collapse briefly creates temperatures hotter than the surface of the sun, for just a few microseconds, mind you, and in an area far smaller than a grain of rice. It's not an underwater supernova, but it's enough to create one of the loudest biological sounds in the ocean. Multiply that by hundreds or even thousands of shrimp in a given area, and you get the reef's version of static, constant crackling, strangely rhythmic. But snapping shrimp are not the only contributors. Reef fish of every persuasion join in, each species with its own signature voice. Damselfish pop and chirp during territorial displays. Parrotfish scrape algae from coral with audible crunches. Wrasses produce low-frequency pulses while hovering, and gobies tick like wind-up toys when guarding their dens. Put it all together, and you have a soundscape as textured as a rainforest, not chaotic, but layered. Acoustic ecologist Dr. Steve Simpson has described coral reefs as cities of sound, and the analogy is apartment. Like a morning in Manhattan, there's a rhythm to the din, predictable surges at dawn and dusk, sudden silences when predators appear, and seasonal symphonies that accompany mating events or spawning frenzies. In fact, if you were to lower a hydrophone into a healthy reef just before sunrise, you'd hear a crescendo of clicks and grunts, a biological reveille, as fish and invertebrates signal the start of their day. Then, as the sun climbs higher, the chorus continues, shifting slightly in character as different species take the sonic stage. By dusk, another burst, a coral reef's version of rush hour traffic. And at night the mood changes. Out come the nocturnal soloists, the soft clickers and whispering crustaceans who've waited all day to be heard. Researchers like Dr. Aaron Mooney from Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution have spent years analyzing reef soundscapes to better understand their structure and ecological function. One of his studies found that specific sound patterns can indicate reef health. A rich, diverse soundscape typically correlates with high biodiversity and ecological resilience. A quiet reef, by contrast, often signals trouble. That's because reef noise isn't just a byproduct of life, it's a beacon. Juvenile fish, fresh from their larval drift across open waters, use reef sounds as navigational guides. They follow the crackle and hum, humming in on the frequency signatures that signal a good place to settle. Dr. Simpson's team even conducted experiments playing recordings of healthy reef soundscapes near degraded coral patches. The result, fish came. Not just any fish, but a broader variety, the kind you'd expect in a bustling living reef. This has profound implications. It suggests that sound is not just communication between individuals, but a kind of ecological infrastructure, the reef calling out to its future residents. And when reefs go quiet, either from coral bleaching, overfishing, or pollution, that call disappears. Fewer fish arrive, recovery slows. The silence becomes self-perpetuating. Back to the shrimp for a moment. There's a whole spectrum of species, some specialized to live in symbiotic relationships with gobies or within burrows shared with crabs. Some even share synchronized snapping sessions, perhaps to maximize confusion among predators. Others cluster into enormous colonies, the snapping sound spreading out in sonic clouds detectable for kilometers. A reef's acoustic environment is also shaped by geophysical factors, the shape of the seafloor, the structure of the coral, even the texture of sand. Different reef formations, fringing, barrier, atoll, each create unique reverberation patterns. The sound of one reef is never quite the same as another's. It's local, specific, alive. There's an aesthetic to it too. When you listen to these recordings, and I do recommend it, even if your only diving gear is a pair of old headphones, you're struck by how oddly familiar the reef's crackle can be, like a fireplace in a distant room, or the sizzle of a skillet 2 walls away. It's white noise with life behind it. One might even say that sound is a reef's memory, the accumulated signatures of years of species arriving and leaving, of predators patrolling and algae blooming. A reef's sound profile is shaped not just by its current residents, but by its ecological history. Some researchers now propose using bioacoustic monitoring as a primary tool for marine conservation. Tim Gordon, another of Simpson's colleagues, has advocated for deploying underwater microphones to track reef health over time, cheaper and less invasive than visual surveys, and often more informative. By creating acoustic baselines, scientists can detect changes long before they become visible to divers. A sudden drop in mid-frequency pops might indicate declining shrimp populations. A flattening of high-frequency harmonics might suggest coral mortality. It's like listening to a city breathe and noticing when it starts to wheeze. Interestingly, even anthropogenic sound, our own noise, gets folded into this world. Reefs near popular dive sites or busy shipping lanes often exhibit altered soundscapes, where human-made low-frequency hums drown out biological calls. This doesn't just affect our enjoyment of marine nature documentaries. It can seriously interfere with the ability of fish larvae to find suitable settlement habitats. In a quiet reef, everything is connected. A clicking goby guards a hole, a snapping shrimp startles a curious wrasse, a juvenile parrotfish navigates toward a familiar crackle. Each sound holds information, often more precise than any visual cue. And in the opaque, three-dimensional maze of coral, where vision is limited and smell is dispersed, sound is king. So the next time you picture a coral reef, all brilliant colors and fluttering fins, try to hear it too. Not just the big splashes and bubbles of nature documentaries, but the living crackle, the intricate texture of underwater life unfolding in sound. A reef is not just a place to be seen, it is a place that listens and is listened to. And down in those tangled halls of branching coral and limestone archways, a tiny shrimp might be cocking its claw, ready to add one more note to the ocean's never-ending score. In the underwater world, distance is not measured only in meters, but in memory. For young fish emerging from their long drifting larval journeys, days, weeks, sometimes months at sea, returning to the reef is like navigating back to a hometown they've never seen. The ocean currents have carried them far from their birthplace. The water is wide, the predators many, and yet, somehow against this backdrop of motion and uncertainty, they find their way, not by sight, not by scent alone, but by sound. The concept is called acoustic orientation, and it's one of marine biology's quieter marvels, the idea that fish use the symphony of reef soundscapes to guide themselves home. These young fish, often no bigger than your thumbnail, are not the aimless wanderers they once seemed to be. They are active listeners, and they are listening for a memory that has yet to happen. Let's set the scene. A coral reef is buzzing, literally, with life. Snapping shrimp crack like campfire logs. Dam shellfish chirp in bursts of territorial enthusiasm. Grazing parrotfish grind coral into sand with a faint crunch. The soundscape varies from reef to reef, but in each the noise becomes an identifying fingerprint. No two reefs crackle quite alike. In a now classic set of experiments, Dr. Steve Simpson, that indefatigable acoustic ecologist we met before, and his colleagues placed underwater speakers near degraded reef habitats. These speakers played recordings of vibrant reef soundscapes from healthier sites. The result was immediate. Fish came. Juvenile race, damselfish, gobies. They all oriented toward the artificial chorus, as though answering a call. It turns out that larval fish, upon completing their planktonic drift phase, begin seeking suitable habitat for settlement. They've got a checklist in mind: shelter, food, not too many predators, and increasingly clear from studies, the right acoustic backdrop. Researchers believe that during early development, possibly even before hatching, these fish begin forming auditory preferences. Later, in the vastness of open water, those preferences help guide them back to the reef type that sounds right. This sense of right isn't abstract. In controlled lab settings, young fish placed in tanks with sound cues from different reef types consistently move toward those resembling their natal habitats. They can detect subtle differences in pitch, rhythm, and complexity. If this reminds you of a songbird recognizing its native tune among a medley, you're not far off. Sound becomes not just a signal, but a signature, a marker of identity and belonging. Of course, hearing underwater requires the right hardware. Fish detect sound using otoliths, tiny calcified structures within their inner ears. These respond to movement and pressure, allowing fish to perceive both the direction and frequency of incoming sounds. Combined with their lateral line systems, a row of specialized cells running along their sides, they can also detect water movement caused by distant acoustic sources. One particularly charming study involved the clownfish, which, contrary to their animated reputation, are fiercely loyal to their anemone homes. Scientists found that juvenile clownfish are more likely to settle near reefs broadcasting the kinds of low-frequency broadband sounds typical of healthy coral. In the wild, such choices are crucial. A poor decision could mean landing on a dying reef, or worse, a predator-laden patch of rubble where the silence spells danger. But let's not forget, reefs can change. Coral bleaching events, destructive storms, and human activity can all mute the reef's voice. And when that voice fades, fish don't come. This isn't just poetic, it's observable. In areas where reef degradation has dulled the natural soundscape, recruitment of young fish drops dramatically. It's as though the reef, having lost its song, can no longer sing its future into being. This has inspired a flurry of creative science. In Australia and the Maldives, for instance, researchers have begun placing underwater speakers near damaged reefs, playing curated soundtracks of bustling reef life. The goal, to artificially re-vocalize the reef and encourage natural recovery. Early trials show promise. Fish numbers increase, bringing with them nutrient cycling, algae control, and even new coral recruits. Life, it seems, listens for life. Of course, this is no magic fix. A reef still needs clean water, stable temperatures, and structural habitat to thrive. But the acoustic lure acts like a first beacon, a lighthouse of sound that tells wandering juveniles, "Come settle here, we're rebuilding." There's another layer too. Different fish species prefer different acoustic profiles. Damselfish may be drawn to high-frequency clicks and snaps, while groupers respond to lower, pulsing grunts. This specificity suggests that reefs don't emit a generic welcome message, but a multilingual chorus tailored to different ears. Soundscapes, then, aren't just beautiful. They're information-rich, species-specific, and evolutionarily fine-tuned. Interestingly, some fish may even recognize familiar individual voices. In species with strong social structures, such as the frillovin gober, researchers suspect that group members can identify each other's unique call patterns, a sort of sonic name tag. These recognitions help maintain social cohesion and reduce conflict, especially in crowded reef neighborhoods where territories overlap like tight-knit row houses. Now, if we imagine the reef as a great living concert hall, with each species playing its part, then larval fish arriving on the current are not just spectators, they're future performers. Their arrival ensures that the music continues, that the cast replenishes, that the reef doesn't fall silent over time, but it is falling silent in places. In reefs afflicted by bleaching or sedimentation, the buzz dims, the pops become sparse, the The vibrant chatter of crustaceans and fish grows hollow, and with that comes a cascading silence. Fewer fish arriving, fewer interactions, fewer coral grazers, fewer symbiotic cleaners. The orchestra thins, note by note. This is where acoustic enrichment becomes more than a tool. It becomes a philosophy. By listening carefully, scientists are now learning to treat silence as a warning. A reef that falls quiet isn't just losing its residents, it's losing its voice. And without that voice, its future listeners may never find their way. So the next time you think about coral reefs, perhaps don't just imagine the kaleidoscope of color, imagine the sound, the skittering shuffle of crabs, the nervous clicks of gobies, the metronome snap of shrimp claws. That crackling rhythm is more than ambience. It's an invitation and a memory waiting to be made. Somewhere right now, a larval fish is drifting on the current, its translucent body pulsing with every tiny beat of its fins. It's listening, not for a sight or a smell, but for a song, one that tells it who it is and where it belongs. Far beneath the waves, where the sun no longer dares to dip its toes, swims the largest creature ever to live on this planet. Longer than a city bus, heavier than a dozen elephants, the blue whale seems too vast to hide, and yet for most of history, it did. We only truly began to know it once we started listening. The blue whale doesn't sing in melodies like its humpback cousin. It communicates in moans, pulses, and long drawn-out rumbles so deep they brush the floor of human hearing, and often fall below it entirely. These are infrasonic calls, sound waves with frequencies below 20 Hz, far lower than most people can detect without technological help. But while our ears may miss them, the ocean carries these low notes like a loyal messenger. Their calls are among the longest-reaching vocalizations in the animal kingdom. In the deep sound channel, that natural underwater corridor where pressure and temperature trap and guide acoustic energy, a blue whale's call can travel thousands of kilometers. Imagine whispering in Iceland and being heard in Brazil. This is not exaggeration. This is ocean physics. In the 1990s, scientists at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration began using underwater listening devices known as hydrophones, originally built to track submarines during the Cold War, to monitor whale calls across entire ocean basins. They discovered that individual whales could be tracked not by sight, but by sound, over distances so great that it redefined how we think about animal communication. What do these calls mean? Part of the answer seems to lie in loneliness. Blue whales are surprisingly solitary for such gregarious giants. Unlike sperm whales, who often travel in tight-knit family groups, or dolphins, who form exuberant pods, blue whales are usually found alone, or in small, loosely connected pairs. Yet they call out into the water again and again, repeating the same deep pulses over and over. Some researchers believe this is a kind of long-distance advertisement, a biological bulletin board for potential mates. Males in particular produce these calls during mating seasons, and they do so with remarkable consistency. Each call is a structured pattern, often beginning with a long moan, followed by pulses and another moan. The entire sequence can last 30 seconds or more, and is repeated at intervals for hours. It's less a song and more a chant, with minor variations that may carry individual or regional signatures. Dr. Anna Shirovich, a marine biologist at Texas University, has spent much of her career tracking these whales through sound. Her studies in the Eastern Pacific have revealed subtle geographic variations in call structure, enough that researchers can distinguish between different populations based on their acoustic dialects. It's a kind of whale accent, shaped not by geography alone but perhaps by culture, lineage, and habit. And there's a curious twist. Over the past few decades, researchers have noticed something peculiar. The pitch of blue whale calls is decreasing. Slowly, steadily, across populations and oceans, the frequency of their calls has dropped by several hertz. The reasons are still debated. Some speculate it's due to the increasing noisiness of the ocean. Whales might be trying to move their voices below the frequency band dominated by ship engines and sonar. Others think it could be a biological indicator of growing population sizes, reducing the need for calls to carry as far, or it might simply be fashion, a cultural shift, like lowering your voice to sound more impressive on a dating app. In whale terms anyway, what's certain is that these calls are not random. A single blue whale can repeat the same sequence for hours, pausing only to surface for breath. The rhythms are so regular that automated systems have been trained to detect and classify them among millions of hours of ocean noise. These same systems, using artificial intelligence and pattern recognition, are now helping scientists build sound maps of whale migrations, feeding areas, and breeding grounds. The implications for conservation are significant. Before passive acoustic monitoring, blue whale populations were notoriously difficult to study. Their vast range and elusive habits made visual surveys unreliable, but by listening, we've begun to piece together their movements. For example, hydrophones off the coast of Sri Lanka revealed a resident population that doesn't migrate, contrary to previous assumptions. Meanwhile, off the Californian coast, researchers identified regular seasonal movements tied to krill availability, tracked entirely by call patterns. These insights are crucial, as blue whales remain endangered. Their numbers, once devastated by commercial whaling in the early 20th century, have been slow to recover. Understanding where and when they move helps guide shipping lanes, reduce vessel strikes, and inform fishing regulations. It's one thing to admire their size, quite another to protect the corridors through which they sing. Blue whales also remind us that communication is not always about immediacy. Their calls can take hours to cross an ocean. The response, if it comes, might arrive the next day or the next week. It's communication measured in trust, not speed, a belief that the message, no matter how far it must travel, will find its listener. And yet, for all the reach and power of these vocalizations, the whales themselves remain largely mysterious. We can hear them, but we rarely see them. We know they are calling, but we do not know what they feel. Are they broadcasting their presence, seeking company, singing out of habit, or simply being themselves, deeply, resoundingly, themselves? One famous case, known to many as 52 Blue, involved the discovery of a whale whose call frequency sat just above the typical blue whale range, at 52 Hz. This lone voice, recorded repeatedly but never matched with visual sightings, sparked decades of curiosity and empathy. Was it a hybrid? A blue whale with a strange larynx, a solitary singer forever out of tune with its peers? The story of 52 Blue became a kind of oceanic myth, a whale out of step, yet persistent. Its calls were detected for years, unwavering, and perhaps that's what moves us. Not the strangeness of the frequency, but the faith in being heard. In a world growing noisier, both above and below the waves, the low, unwavering calls of blue whales are a kind of acoustic anchor. They remind us that communication doesn't have to be fast to be meaningful. It doesn't have to be complex to be sincere. Sometimes it just has to carry, across the deep, across the dark, across the silence. And there, somewhere beyond the horizon, someone might answer. Imagine you're deep underwater, in the quiet swell between reef and open sea, and a shadow passes above. It is not a predator, not a cloud. It's a container ship. Perhaps it's bound for Singapore or Seattle. Its hull taller than a cathedral, its engine the size of a small building. To you, a marine creature tuned to subtle sounds and whispering reefs. It is thunder incarnate, and it's just one of thousands. The ocean, once a place of natural sound, whale songs, shrimp snaps, the delicate crackle of reef life, has grown increasingly loud. Human-generated noise now blankets vast swaths of the sea, altering behavior, masking communication, and in some cases causing physical harm to the creatures who live there. This is the era of anthropogenic noise, and for all our tools and technologies, we're only beginning to hear its consequences. It starts with ships. From massive cargo carriers to high-speed ferries, commercial vessels produce low-frequency sounds that travel for hundreds of kilometers. These noises, often between 20 and 200 Hz, overlap with the frequency ranges used by many large marine animals, including blue whales and fin whales. When a ship engine groans through the sea, it's not a whisper, it's a curtain, a low, steady rumble that drowns out communication, like trying to converse next to an idling freight train. Studies by Dr. Christopher Clark, former director of Cornell University's Bioacoustics Research Program, have shown that in some regions of the Atlantic, noise from shipping has doubled every decade since the mid-20th century. That is not a typo. The ocean has grown twice as loud, over and over again. The scale is staggering, and the effects are wide-ranging. Take the North Atlantic right whale, critically endangered, with fewer than 400 individuals remaining. These whales rely on low-frequency calls to maintain contact with one another, particularly between mothers and calves. When background noise increases, their calls are harder to hear. In response, the whales try to shout louder, a phenomenon researchers call the Lombard effect, named after the way humans raise their voices in noisy rooms. But whales have their limits. Louder calls mean more energy spent, less time feeding, and potentially more attention from predators or unwanted rivals. Then there's the issue of masking. Imagine a dolphin trying to use echolocation to hunt in a bay filled with jet skis and motorboats. The animal sends out clicks, waiting for echoes to bounce back from fish or obstacles, but the return signal is swallowed by ambient roar. The dolphin, disoriented, may miss a meal, or worse, collide with something it couldn't see. Some of the most intense noise comes from military sonar. Mid-frequency active sonar, used to detect submarines, has been implicated in mass strandings of beaked whales, whose internal anatomy makes them especially vulnerable to sudden pressure changes. These whales, often elusive and rarely observed, have been found washed ashore with signs of hemorrhaging around the brain and inner ear. Naval exercises don't happen daily, but when they do, the sound can travel for miles, ricocheting through complex underwater topographies with lethal consequence. Then there's seismic surveying, a process used in oil and gas exploration. Ships tow arrays of air guns that blast compressed air into the water, producing powerful sound waves that penetrate the seabed. The reflected echoes help map subsurface geological structures, a kind of acoustic X-ray for oil hunters. These surveys can run for weeks, firing shots every 10 seconds day and night. The resulting soundscape is, in a word, brutal. Fish behavior changes. Whale song ceases. Invertebrates, the quiet creatures of the benthic world, show stress responses at the cellular level. Saurolops, for instance, have been observed clapping their shells shut in rhythmic panic. Squid alter their swimming patterns. Lobsters retreat into burrows. Even plankton, the ocean's tiniest drifters, exhibit changes in distribution under chronic noise exposure. When the smallest creatures are affected, the consequences ripple upward. Some of the most compelling evidence comes from controlled playback experiments. In one study, Dr. Lucia Dirio and Dr. Christopher Clark played recordings of ship noise in a Mediterranean bay and observed the responses of fin whales. The whales stopped singing, they left the area. Silence, followed by absence. And in the deep sea, where acoustic cues may be one of the only reliable signals, silence is not peace, it's danger. It's worth noting that this acoustic pollution is not easily visible. You can't map it like an oil spill. There are no floating slicks, no telltale sheen on the surface. It slips through the sea like fog, distorting perception, confounding communication. Many marine animals live by sound, in the same way we live by sight. To take that from them is not a nuisance, it is a profound disruption. And yet, there's hope, or at least, possibility. Quieting the seas doesn't require shutting down global trade or naval defense. It just requires listening better. Take the example of ship design. Research has shown that much of a vessel's noise comes not from its engine per se, but from a phenomenon called cavitation, the formation and collapse of bubbles around the spinning blades of a propeller. By redesigning propellers to reduce this effect, ships can become quieter without sacrificing speed or efficiency. Some naval architects have even incorporated these changes into new builds, resulting in vessels that are less detectable to both submarines and sperm whales, a win for tacticians and conservationists alike. Slowing down helps too. A ship traveling at 10 knots generates significantly less noise than one moving at 20. In certain coastal regions, slow steaming has been promoted not just to reduce fuel use and emissions, but to protect marine life from noise and ship strikes. The benefits are tangible in studies conducted off the coast of British Columbia. Reduced vessel speeds led to marked decreases in both underwater noise and observed behavioral disruptions in local cetaceans. On the policy front, the International Maritime Organization has issued voluntary guidelines for reducing underwater noise from ships. Some ports now offer incentives for quieter ships, reduced fees, priority berths, in much the same way cities might reward electric cars. It's a modest start, but one that suggests a shift in awareness. We are no longer pretending the sea is silent. And then there's the role of citizen science. Projects like Ocean Networks Canada and the Global Ocean Soundscapes Program have begun crowdsourcing acoustic data. Divers, boaters, and coastal communities are uploading hydrophone recordings, creating a patchwork quilt of underwater soundscapes that help researchers track changes over time. The sea is being mapped not just in temperature and salinity, but in song and silence. We may not be able to rewind the clock to a quieter ocean, but we can still learn to listen, to understand what our engines and airguns have silenced. The key lies in humility, the willingness to treat sound not just as a human tool, but as a shared resource. Because the sea was speaking long before we arrived, and the least we can do is stop shouting over it. For a brief, strange window, not long ago, the ocean exhaled. In the early days of the global lockdown, when city streets emptied, airports idled, and the daily roar of human movement slowed to a murmur, something similar happened out at sea. Cargo vessels halted mid-route. Cruise ships moored indefinitely. Ports stood quiet under skies cleared of contrails, and beneath the waves, for the first time in generations, the ocean hushed. Marine scientists have quietly referred to this period as the anthropause. It was not complete silence, of course. The wind still stirred, whales still sang, and snapping shrimp still clapped in chorus. But it was an unmistakable dip in the human-made low-frequency din that typically fills coastal waters. For researchers, it was as if someone had finally turned the volume down on a blaring speaker, revealing the subtler music beneath. The first clues came not from sonograms or spectrographs, but from listening stations, hydrophones anchored in coastal regions and deep-sea basins, originally placed to monitor whale populations or seismic activity. These passive acoustic recorders had long captured the steady grumble of engines, the occasional sonic boom of naval exercises, and the sonic squiggles of marine mammals trying to rise above it all. But suddenly, the noise floor dropped. In British Columbia's Salish Sea, for instance, the ocean quieted by roughly 6 decibels in early spring, a reduction equivalent to halving the intensity of local underwater noise. Michelle Fournette, an acoustic ecologist from Cornell University, described the moment as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, the rare chance to observe how animals behave in a less polluted acoustic environment. What did the whales do? They talked more softly. Prior to the anthropause, humpback whales near Juneau, Alaska, had been increasingly competing with ship noise. In high-traffic zones, their vocalizations grew louder, sometimes overlapping in a frantic bid to be heard, the marine version of shouting at a cocktail party. But when the boat stopped, the whales toned it down. Their calls grew more intricate, more layered, and notably more relaxed. It was not just about volume, it was about timing, complexity, and confidence. Without the mechanical roar, whale communication returned to a quieter, more measured cadence. Some researchers even observed more frequent social interactions, suggesting that the quieter conditions may have encouraged more nuanced exchanges. In the Bay of Fundy, scientists documented similar shifts in North Atlantic right whales. With fewer ships passing through this critical feeding ground, the whales' stress hormone levels, measured through fecal samples which marine biologists collect with admirable determination, declined. It was the first physiological evidence connecting noise reduction to improved animal welfare in the wild, and it came during a global crisis, like a whisper of good news in a cacophony of headlines. Further south, in the Mediterranean, a temporary dip in cruise and ferry traffic allowed researchers to record previously obscured fish choruses and dolphin whistles. In the Indian Ocean, reef sites near the Maldives buzzed with a clearer, richer chorus of biological sound. It was as if entire ecosystems were stepping forward, filling the acoustic space long held hostage by propellers and pistons. Of course, this quieting did not last. By the end of the following year, commercial shipping had not only resumed, it had surged to meet rising global demand. Ports grew busier than ever, traffic lanes once again filled with the steady thunder of hulls and motors, and the whales predictably began to shout. But the anthropause left behind more than cleaner spectrograms and curious anecdotes. It created a baseline, a control group, that scientists had longed for but could never ethically produce. After all, you can't ask the global economy to pause just so you can listen for a while. But it did, however, briefly, and in that pause, researchers collected troves of data now being used to model acoustic thresholds, behavioral tipping points, and habitat quality in a way never before possible. Kate Stafford, a marine biologist at the University of Washington, compared it to suddenly turning off a jackhammer while trying to eavesdrop on a distant violin. For decades, we had been trying to study communication and stress in marine animals while barely hearing the violin at all. During the anthropause, for once we did. Some nations have begun integrating these insights into environmental planning. In France, for example, port authorities have used the quiet period to study how altered shipping schedules might help reduce noise in sensitive areas. In Canada, proposals have been floated to designate seasonal quiet zones in key whale habitats, times when ship speeds or routes could be adjusted to protect mating or feeding behaviors. Even the shipping industry, often slow to adapt, took notice. Several companies reported lower maintenance costs during the slowdown due to decreased engine strain and propeller wear. Quiet, it turns out, is not just good for whales, it may be good for business. Public interest has also played a role. The notion that whales had a moment during lockdowns captured imaginations worldwide. Artists composed music, inspired by hydrophone recordings. Filmmakers requested footage of the silent seas. In a year otherwise defined by confinement and loss, the idea that somewhere blue whales were singing in peace struck a tender chord. There are, inevitably, caveats. Not all areas quieted equally. Some regions saw increases in local fishing activity or continued naval exercises. Not all animals benefited in the same way, and the long-term impacts of this brief silence remain uncertain. But what is clear is that, for the first time in living memory, the ocean got a word in edgewise, and we were able to listen. It begs the question, what if quiet were not an accident, but a strategy? What if we began designing our use of the ocean, our routes, our speeds, our engines, with the same care we use in shaping soundscapes on land? Cities build noise buffers along highways. Office buildings control ambient noise to improve focus. Why should the ocean, a space filled with acoustic creatures, deserve less? One doesn't have to shut down the world to give marine life a better chance. Sometimes just shifting a shipping lane a few kilometers offshore can reduce the impact on coastal nurseries. Sometimes, changing the propeller design on a single cargo ship can lower its noise signature for decades. The anthropause gave us a glimpse of the possible, not a return to some primordial silence, but a recalibration, a middle volume, a renewed balance between our movements and the ocean's murmur. Because now we know, when we quiet down, the sea finds its voice again, and it sings not just for us, but for itself. There is a saying among marine biologists to find a whale, close your eyes and listen. It sounds poetic, and it is. But it's also become increasingly practical, because in recent years the ocean has been transformed not just by technology that sees, but by technology that hears. Hydrophones now hang like patient ears beneath the waves, recording everything from rumbling earthquakes to the faint purr of a haddock. And with the help of algorithms and careful listening, we've begun to tune into patterns once too subtle or slow to detect. This is the age of acoustic monitoring, an era when science listens first and looks second. It began, as many marine technologies do, with defense. During the Cold War, a network of underwater microphones known as the Sound Surveillance System, or SUSIS, was deployed by the US Navy to detect Soviet submarines. It worked astonishingly well. What the military didn't expect was that these same hydrophones would pick up something else, the songs of whales traveling across ocean basins with uncanny regularity. What began as espionage became biology. Once declassified, SOSIS data was offered to scientists, and the revelations came quickly. Whales migrated in broad arcs, timed to seasons and currents. Fin whales moved in synchronized patterns across hemispheres. Blue whale populations that had been thought extinct were detected by their infrasonic calls, like ghost notes rising from the deep. Suddenly, the ocean wasn't just a field of study, it was a concert, and we had finally opened our ears. Today, researchers deploy hydrophones from buoys, seafloor cables, autonomous gliders, and even tags attached to animals themselves. These instruments collect thousands of hours of audio, which are then analyzed for frequency, rhythm, repetition, and source. A sperm whale's foraging clicks, a reef's evening chorus, a ship's distant hum, all of it becomes data, and increasingly the analysis is done by machine. Artificial intelligence tools, trained on massive datasets of known sounds, can now distinguish between species, behaviors, even individual animals. The field of ecoacoustics, a term that sounds like a forgotten ambient music genre, is transforming how we study marine ecosystems. One striking example comes from the Stellwagen Bank National Marine Sanctuary off the coast of Massachusetts. There, a network of passive acoustic monitors has been tracking right whale calls, shipping noise and weather events in real time. This data is used not just for research, but for immediate action. When whales are detected in a particular zone, ships are alerted and asked to slow down. The ocean, in effect, speaks, and policy responds. But this goes beyond whales. In coral reefs, hydrophones help measure biodiversity. A vibrant reef crackles with shrimp, chatters with fish, and hums with energy. A damaged reef, by contrast, falls silent. By recording and comparing these soundscapes over time, scientists can track the progress of restoration efforts. Dr. Timothy Gordon and colleagues, working on reefs in the Indo-Pacific, found that sites with greater acoustic complexity also showed faster ecological recovery. Sound, it seems, is both a symptom and a signal of life. Even more remarkably, researchers have begun to detect illegal fishing through sound. In protected marine reserves, the revving of boat engines and the rhythmic clatter of trawlers can be picked up by remote hydrophones. In places like the Galapagos and the Mediterranean, authorities have used acoustic data to intercept unauthorized vessels, a kind of sonar sheriff patrolling the invisible frontier. And the applications keep growing. Off the coast of Alaska, biologists are studying the vocalizations of ice seals, whose calls bounce through melting channels and shifting flows. In Antarctica, underwater microphones are helping track the seasonal movements of elusive beaked whales. And in the vastness of the deep ocean, where no light reaches and no diver dares to linger, sound is the only clue we have to who lives and how. This is crucial, because some of the most vulnerable species are also the hardest to study. Deep-sea fishes, benthic invertebrates, and even seafloor microbes leave few visible signs. But if they create, or are affected by acoustic signatures, then we can begin to map their presence. Some researchers now believe that soundscapes may one day serve as proxies for entire food webs. If you know what a healthy reef sounds like, you may not need to count every parrotfish, you can listen instead. This idea, that ecosystems can be measured by their noise, has gained traction beyond the ocean too. In forests, sound monitoring helps track bird diversity and insect abundance. In wetlands, the chorus of frogs can indicate water quality. Across biomes, acoustic fingerprints may become a new kind of ecological indicator, one that's non-invasive, cost-effective, and increasingly precise. But marine soundscapes offer a unique opportunity. Unlike land ecosystems, which are often fragmented by roads and cities, the ocean remains acoustically connected. A whale call travels farther than a shout on land ever could. A snapping shrimp's crack can signal the return of reef life after a storm. And in this acoustic fabric, patterns emerge. Patterns that reveal migration, spawning, disturbance, recovery. Already, long-term monitoring projects are building acoustic time capsules. Programs like Ocean Observatory's initiative in the US and Ocean Sound in Europe are collecting multi-year datasets from coastal and pelagic zones. These archives help researchers study everything from climate-driven changes in fish behavior to shifts in seasonal plankton blooms. The ocean's memory, it turns out, is written not just in currents and sediments, but in sound, and there's artistry in it too. Some scientists, inspired by their research, have transformed recordings into music, layering whale calls with piano, pairing choral snaps with violin. The result is not only beautiful, but strangely grounding. We're reminded that these sounds are real, that they belong to places, to creatures, to moments unfolding beneath us as we go about our day. In a sense, the ocean's voice is always on. The question is whether we choose to listen. Because in the era of hydrophones and machine learning, we no longer need to see a dolphin leap or a whale breach to know they are there. We can hear them, their calls, their clicks, their collective conversations, all drifting up from the deep, waiting for ears that care. And just as we learn their voices, we might begin to remember our own. What if you could plant a coral reef? Not just with rocks and polyps, but with music. This is the idea behind acoustic enrichment. A blossoming field of marine restoration that uses sound to bring damaged reefs back to life. Not metaphorical sound, mind you. Real, recorded underwater soundscapes, the crackle of snapping shrimp, the chatter of fish, the low thrum of a healthy coral community. Played through underwater speakers, these soundtracks become lures, invitations to life. They say, in effect, it's safe here. There's company. Come settle. Coral reefs, those brilliant underwater cities, are increasingly under siege. Rising temperatures bleach coral. Acidification weakens its skeleton. Overfishing throws food webs out of balance, and pollution clouds the water. Many reefs are reduced to hushed, broken places, and when the fish leave or never arrive, recovery stalls. But sound, it turns out, can be a catalyst. The science began simply enough. A team led by Dr. Tim Gordon and Dr. Steve Simpson, both pioneers in marine bioacoustics, set up underwater speakers near degraded reefs along Australia's Great Barrier Reef. They played recordings taken from nearby healthy reefs, rich with the ambient snaps, pops, and burbles of marine life. Over several weeks, they compared fish populations in musical plots with silent control areas. The results were dramatic. Reefs with soundscapes attracted twice as many fish species and over twice the number of individuals compared to control plots. Even more encouraging, the newcomers included a wide range of ecological roles: grazers, predators, detritivores, not just more fish, a better mix. The kind that helps reefs function, clean, balance, and eventually rebuild. The researchers were careful not to overstate. Acoustic enrichment doesn't fix everything. It doesn't lower ocean temperatures or rebuild coral skeletons, but it does help restore one crucial layer of the ecosystem: the community. Fish bring nutrients. Fish control algae. Fish attract more fish. A reef that sounds alive begins to act alive. Why does it work? Young fish are naturally drawn to the sound of a healthy reef. After drifting in the open ocean during their larval phase, a precarious period filled with currents, predators, and uncertainty, they need to find a home. Sound travels farther than light or chemical cues underwater, especially at night when many fish settle. A reef's acoustic profile acts like a lighthouse, and when that signal is strong, fish come. When it fades, they drift past, looking for something more promising. By restoring the sound, even artificially, scientists are giving the reef a voice again, and they're getting creative. In Indonesia, a group of community-led conservationists has begun experimenting with waterproof speakers made from repurposed plastic and salvaged solar panels. They call them reef radios. In the Philippines, marine scientists have teamed up with local fishermen to deploy small battery-powered sound units in areas where reefs are being replanted. The hope is that fish will return, and in doing so, make the restoration more self-sustaining. Of course, playing sound underwater comes with its own set of challenges. Marine speakers must be sealed, pressure-tolerant, and able to project sound in all directions. The recordings themselves must be carefully curated. A reef's soundscape is a nuanced symphony. Too much low-frequency hum can scare off juveniles. Too little high-frequency snap might fail to attract crustaceans. Researchers now spend weeks collecting baseline audio from healthy sites to use as templates. Then there's the question of volume. Louder isn't better. In fact, too much sound can become a stressor, not a lure. The goal is subtlety, to match the natural volume of a reef at dawn or dusk, when activity is highest. This delicate tuning, like seasoning a soup, makes all the difference. One study conducted off the coast of Vanuatu found that acoustic enrichment worked best when combined with physical habitat restoration, like placing coral fragments or artificial structures. The sound attracted the fish, but the habitat gave them a reason to stay. It's a reminder that no single solution fixes the reef, but layered together, these methods can give it a fighting chance. Interestingly, the benefits may ripple outward. A reef restored with acoustic cues becomes a node in the larger soundscape of the ocean. It can help seed nearby areas. It can provide a source of calls that reach drifting larvae tens of kilometers away. The idea of acoustic corridors, networks of reefs guiding young fish from place to place, is still new but growing in appeal. Some even imagine coordinated restoration efforts timed to seasonal spawning events, with soundscapes designed like migratory trails. All of this is still early science, but it's hopeful science, and it shows that even in the face of enormous loss, life listens for life. There's a poetic twist here too. For centuries humans have extracted from the sea fish, oil, minerals, stories. Now we're offering something back, a voice, not ours, exactly, but one we helped capture. The sounds of a healthy reef, played like a memory, passed from speaker to water to gill to fin, and the fish respond. They arrive in cautious pulses, darting through columns of bleached coral and tentative algae. They settle, explore, nibble, clean. Their presence changes things. Soon the algae retreats. New coral polyps take root. A crab reclaims its burrow. The reef begins to remember itself. It starts not with sight or structure, but with sound. Because even underwater, recovery begins with a whisper. Out past the coral reefs and kelp forests, where the seafloor drops and the light grows lean, lies a region often described as the deep quiet. But this descriptor, while poetic, is not entirely accurate. Because even in the dim, cold, seemingly lifeless stretches of the deep, the ocean speaks. It speaks not in songs or chatter, but in murmurs, in sand that sings, in ice that cracks, in volcanoes that mutter under their breath. These are the geophonic voices of the sea, the sounds made not by creatures but by the planet itself. Let's begin with something unexpected: sand that sings. In certain parts of the world, such as the shores of the Persian Gulf and parts of Southeast Asia, beachgoers have long reported strange acoustic phenomena. When walking on specific types of dry, rounded sand grains, they hear musical hums, sometimes described as low-pitched notes, other times as squeaky violin glides. This is singing sand, and while it's most often heard on land, its underwater counterpart can also occur in shifting subaqueous dunes, where currents move sand grains in unison. In the right conditions, those moving grains produce tiny vibrations, which are then transmitted as low-frequency hums that can resonate across sandy slopes. But perhaps the most striking example of Earth-made ocean sound is found in the polar regions, where the ice, that brittle skin of the sea, speaks in tones that range from haunting to explosive. When glaciers meet the ocean, they calve, great chunks of ancient ice, shearing off and crashing into the water with tremendous force. To the eye, it's a spectacle. To the ear, it's a layered drama. There's the initial rumble, the cracking echo of internal fractures, and then the submersion hiss as ice meets liquid. But the real show happens underwater. Here, hydrophones capture a cascading series of sounds, low-frequency booms, sharp popping as air bubbles, trapped for millennia, are suddenly released, and long squeals as icebergs grind against one another or the seafloor. These are the voices of moving ice, groans and whines that geophysicists study to better understand glacial dynamics and climate change. Dr. Erin Pettit, a glaciologist who quite literally listens to ice, has developed methods to track these calving events acoustically. By analyzing the spectral signature of each event, she can estimate the volume of ice lost, the speed of collapse, and even the likely cause, be it meltwater pressure, tidal flexing, or internal cracking. In effect, she's reading the ice's diary, one groan at a time. Now shift your ears again to the deep sea, where the seafloor rumbles and the earth breathes heat. Underwater volcanoes, known as seamounts or mid-ocean ridges, produce a complex array of sounds. Some are barely audible, a soft, persistent bubbling as hydrothermal vents release hot, mineral-rich fluids into the cold abyss. Others are sudden and percussive, the booming of a submarine eruption, which can travel thousands of kilometers through the ocean's acoustic corridors. In 1996, NOAA's Pacific Marine Environmental Laboratory detected a peculiar sound, later dubbed the bloop. It was a low-frequency burst, far louder than a blue whale, picked up by sensors thousands of miles apart. For years it became the stuff of mystery, whispered about in both scientific papers and speculative blogs. Alien? Leviathan? Secret military tech? Eventually the answer turned out to be wonderfully mundane. The bloop was the sound of icequakes, large icebergs cracking and fracturing in the Southern Ocean. Disappointing to conspiracy theorists, perhaps, but thrilling to glaciologists. It was proof of just how powerful these natural events can be, and just how far their signatures can travel. Even earthquakes, often imagined as silent shudders, produce distinct underwater sound. When tectonic plates grind and slip, they generate pressure waves that race through the ocean, often faster than the quake itself travels through land. These T-waves, as they're called, can be recorded by hydrophones deployed thousands of kilometers away, long before any surface tsunami is visible. Scientists now use these seismic acoustics to monitor plate boundaries, detect undersea landslides, and even anticipate volcanic activity. It's one of the few tools we have for peering into the deep, opaque processes that shape our planet. A form of remote listening, that turns pressure waves into geological stethoscopes. And then there are the strange ones, mysterious hums, long, low moans of unknown origin, patterns that repeat but don't correspond to known species, vessels, or events. Some of these sounds remain unnamed and unexplained, archived with enigmatic titles like upsweep and whistle. They're logged by research institutions with both scientific precision and a touch of narrative flair. Because when the earth murmurs and no one understands why, it's hard not to get a little lyrical. But these aren't just curiosities, they're data points. In a warming world, the sounds of shifting glaciers, venting ridges, and grinding tectonic plates offer vital clues. They help us model sea level rise, earthquake risks, and deep ocean chemistry. And because sound travels so efficiently underwater, hydrophones can pick up these signals from places where deploying cameras or probes would be logistically impossible. There's also an emerging field of acoustic geology, the study of how different substrates like rock, sediment, or volcanic glass influence and transmit sound. By bouncing acoustic signals off the seafloor and analyzing the return, scientists can map terrain, locate methane seeps, or identify habitats that might support rare life forms. Even bubbles have a story to tell. In the Gulf of Mexico and the Arctic, methane bubbles seeping from the seafloor produce distinctive plink sounds as they rise and burst. These have become a proxy for identifying areas of permafrost thaw or potential gas release, events with profound implications for climate systems. So yes, the Earth speaks, and sometimes quite loudly. The beauty of these geophonic sounds is that they remind us the ocean is more than biology. It is also geology, climate, chemistry, a place where molten rock and frozen ice both have a voice, where continents collide and announce their friction, where the planet exhales, and that exhalation resonates through liquid space. It's easy to romanticize whale songs or fish chatter, but the voice of the ocean is older still. It predates mammals, reefs, and even the first finned explorers of the Cambrian. It is the voice of plate and pressure, of shifting weight and time. And in listening to it, we hear the earth not as background but as speaker, a seafloor quake, a calving glacier, a chorus of rising bubbles. These are the bass notes of the world's oldest melody, and somewhere in the deep hum of the abyss, that melody continues. Down in the deepest layers of the ocean, where light fades to memory and pressure presses like 1,000 atmospheres of silence, sound endures. In fact, it flourishes. Welcome to the bathypelagic and abyssopelagic zones, the midnight and abyssal realms, where the ocean's acoustic life doesn't stop. It simply changes key. Imagine a place where no sunlight has ever reached, where the temperature hovers just above freezing, and where the creatures move not in flocks or herds, but in flickers, bioluminescent sparks amid eternal dark. You might assume such a place would be mute, but the ocean, clever thing that it is, finds a way to speak even in silence. Down here, sound becomes the dominant mode of perception. With no light to guide them, deep-sea organisms rely on vibration, pressure waves, and the faintest clicks to find food, avoid predators, and occasionally locate a romantic prospect. If you can call two Twilight Zone squid finding each other romantic, which I certainly do. Let's begin with the big picture. How sound travels at different depths. In the ocean, sound speed increases with both temperature and pressure. Near the surface, where temperatures are warmer but pressure is low, sound travels quickly. As you descend, temperature drops, slowing the speed, until the increasing pressure starts to dominate, speeding it up again. This creates a layer where sound speed reaches a minimum, the deep sound channel, or SOFAR channel, which we've met before. Down here, low-frequency sounds become trapped, and can travel astonishing distances with minimal loss. But even beyond that zone, into the crushing dark, sound continues its journey, reflecting off sediment, refracting through water masses, bouncing along the seafloor like an echo with nowhere to go. And the creatures, they're listening. Take the grenadier, also known as rattails, a family of deep-sea fish found more than 5,000 meters down. Studies conducted using deep-sea landers, equipped with hydrophones and baited cameras, have detected rhythmic pulses, likely generated by these fish, possibly for territorial displays or spacing. The signals are low and intermittent. Imagine a bass drum from a neighbor's basement party, except the neighbor is a fish with a tail like a feather duster, and a look of perpetual surprise. Then there's the cusk eel. Despite the misleading name, It is not an eel but rather a slender, secretive fish, known for generating low-frequency drumming sounds. Males produce these sounds using sonic muscles around their swim bladders, and it's believed that these may help establish dominance or attract mates in the lightless dark. These calls are so faint that only the closest neighbors are likely to hear them, acoustic whispering in the abyss. Squid and other cephalopods may not produce much sound themselves, but they respond keenly to it. Their finely tuned statocysts, organs akin to our inner ears, help them detect pressure changes and orientation. In controlled experiments, species like the Humboldt squid have shown strong startle responses to low-frequency noise, and in the wild, their movements sometimes sync with fluctuations in ambient sound, suggesting that they are not only aware of acoustic conditions, but may use them to time migration or schooling behavior. Perhaps the strangest deep-sea acoustic adaptation belongs to the abyssal tripod fish, a creature that plants its elongated fins into the seafloor like stilts and waits patiently for prey. These fish are almost motionless for long periods, but have unusually sensitive lateral lines that detect the slightest vibration. They don't generate much sound themselves, but they're excellent eavesdroppers, picking up the tremble of crustaceans moving across sediment or the distant approach of a predator. But it's not just individual species that matter, it's the collective hum. Deep-sea soundscapes are shaped by both biological and geophysical forces. There's the constant hiss of microbubbles, the faint clink of falling marine snow, that gentle rain of organic material descending from the upper ocean, and the more dramatic creaks of shifting tectonic plates. Each layer of the deep has its own ambient soundtrack. In 2016, a team of researchers, led by Dr. Robert Dziak, deployed a hydrophone mooring in the Challenger Deep, the deepest point in the Mariana Trench. For nearly a month, it recorded the unceasing sounds of life and motion, baleen whale calls, distant storms, the grinding of ocean currents, and yes, even fish. Life, it turns out, is noisy even at nearly 11,000 meters below the surface. This was a revelation. Previously, it had been assumed that the abyss was mostly silent, save for occasional seismic events. But the recording revealed a surprisingly active acoustic environment. It wasn't a coral reef cacophony, but it wasn't quiet, either. The deep had a voice, subtle, slow, and persistent. Researchers now believe that studying deep-sea soundscapes can help us understand large-scale oceanographic changes. For instance, shifts in current strength or temperature can alter the pitch and texture of ambient noise. The collapse of methane hydrates on the seafloor, a process linked to climate change, produces distinct acoustic signatures. Even the behavior of abyssal animals, their migrations, feeding times, and seasonal patterns, can be inferred by tracking long-term changes in background sound. There's also growing interest in how artificial sound propagates in the deep sea. Deep-sea mining operations, still in their infancy, pose a new and largely unstudied threat. The machines used to dredge or drill generate high-intensity noise that could affect species adapted to the hush of the abyss. And since low-frequency sound travels so well, the acoustic footprint of a single operation may stretch far beyond the immediate work zone. Without long-term baseline data, it's difficult to assess the true impact. That's why deep-sea listening stations, such as those managed by Japan's JAMSTEC or the European Union's MSO network, are now being equipped with more sophisticated hydrophones, able to record continuously for years at a time. The idea is not just to monitor known species, but to discover new ones, to map biodiversity, not by what we see, but by what we hear. There's something strangely comforting in that. To imagine a place so remote, so unlit, where life nonetheless pulses with quiet sound, it's like discovering that the dark hums with lullabies, not loud, not grand, but real. The ocean's depth does not muffle its voice, it deepens it. And so the abyss becomes a kind of orchestra pit. Invisible instruments, unknown players, timeless melodies. You don't need to see them to know they're there, you only need to listen, because even in the places where sunlight fails, sound remains. Imagine unfolding a map of the ocean, but instead of lines showing currents or shading for depths, this one brims with sound, a forest of pops in the reef margins, hushed hums from abyssal plains, whales' low moans winding like ribbons across entire basins, shrimp crackles clustering in tight, coral-laced crescents. This isn't cartography in the traditional sense. This is acoustic mapping, a new frontier in understanding the ocean, one vibration at a time. The ambition is as bold as it is beautiful to build a comprehensive living map of the sea, not by its geography, but by its soundscape, to chart not where things are, but how they speak. And perhaps through this, to better grasp how ecosystems shift, how life migrates, and how the ocean itself responds to the rhythms of our warming world. Acoustic mapping, or soundscape ecology, is still an emerging science, but its building blocks are surprisingly accessible. Underwater microphones, hydrophones, arranged in networks or set adrift on autonomous vehicles, collecting the audio tapestry of the deep. Each hydrophone picks up local sound, from the frenetic chorus of a reef to the solitary clicks of a wandering sperm whale, to the slow pulse of a distant earthquake. Stitch those recordings together, and you start to hear, quite literally, the shape of things. One of the most ambitious efforts is the International Quiet Ocean Experiment, a global project aiming to study ocean soundscapes over time. Born from a collaboration of marine scientists, acousticians, and conservationists, the initiative seeks not just to collect data, but to develop a common framework for interpreting it. Because unlike images or temperatures, sound doesn't sit still, it flows, it overlaps. It needs a new kind of map, one that dances. In Europe, the JOMO PANS project, Joint Monitoring Program for Ambient Noise in the North Sea, has deployed hydrophones across the North Sea to assess how underwater noise varies across space and season. Their goal is to generate high-resolution noise maps that can be used to guide maritime traffic, protect sensitive habitats, and assess human impact. But the possibilities stretch beyond regulation. By layering biological sounds over these maps, scientists can begin to visualize ecological patterns: where cod come to spawn, where dolphins pass each spring, where a reef might be rebounding or falling quiet. The sounds become signals, and the signals become shapes. In the Pacific, researchers with Ocean Networks Canada have taken this even further. Their underwater observatories stream real-time audio and oceanographic data to shore, where it is analyzed by both algorithms and, quite charmingly, citizen scientists. A program called Listening to the Deep Ocean invites volunteers to annotate recordings, helping identify whale calls, fish choruses, and even human intrusions. It's crowdsourced cartography, with ears. There's also the question of frequency. Different creatures communicate at different pitches, so an acoustic map must be layered like a symphony score. High frequencies for shrimp and reef fish, mid-range tones for dolphins and seals, low-frequency channels for baleen whales and earthquakes. By separating these layers, researchers can isolate specific communities' behaviors and seasonal shifts. Over time, this becomes more than just a tool for biology. It becomes a way to measure change. For instance, rising ocean temperatures can alter species distributions, causing fish to move north, or coral reefs to expand or contract. These changes often happen slowly, subtly, but they leave traces in sound. A reef once rich with chorus fish may grow quiet. A fjord once silent in winter may buzz with new arrivals. Acoustic maps, especially when built over years, can capture these shifts faster than visual surveys ever could. Even the daily rhythms of life, the acoustic circadian patterns of the sea, become data. Many marine animals follow day cycles. Fish chorus at dawn and dusk, shrimp snap most at night, whales change call patterns depending on light. These sound rhythms are sensitive to light pollution, water clarity, and even lunar cycles. Tracking them gives insight into the ocean's heartbeat. And let us not forget the role of artificial intelligence. Machine learning algorithms trained on millions of audio samples now assist in sorting and interpreting these vast archives. They can flag anomalies, identify overlapping species, and even detect new sounds that don't match any known source. One recent case involved a pattern of clicks in the deep Pacific that didn't align with any known whale species, possibly hinting at an undiscovered population or a rarely heard behavior. The map, in other words, isn't just filling in old blanks. It's revealing entirely new coastlines of knowledge. But with every new map comes a question: what are we mapping for? Yes, there is utility, noise regulation, conservation planning, ecological forecasting. But there is also something deeper, an emotional cartography, a sense of connection to the living sea. When we map the ocean by its sounds, we don't just document biology, we acknowledge presence, voice, sentience. Imagine schoolchildren one day pulling up an interactive map and clicking to hear the accent of a Sumatran reef, or the nocturnal chatter of an Arctic kelp bed, or the infrasonic pulse of a migrating blue whale. These are not just facts, they are invitations to know the ocean not as terrain, but as chorus. Of course, challenges remain. Hydrophones are expensive, data storage is enormous, background noise from human activity complicates analysis, and cultural barriers persist. Not all marine planning authorities yet consider acoustic health a priority. But momentum is growing. New international frameworks, like the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development, have prioritized acoustic monitoring as a core pillar of future research. The idea is not just to listen, but to integrate that listening into how we protect, manage, and relate to the sea. And the vision? It's grand. An acoustic map of the entire ocean, updated in real time. A map where you can scroll through sound layers like time zones, from reef dawn to abyssal midnight. A map that not only shows where things are, but how they live. A map where the ocean is not a blank blue sheet, but a living, breathing, singing world. A map where the silence is never empty, just waiting to be heard. What if the ocean were a conversation? One long, meandering, continent-spanning conversation, and we've only just begun to hear it. Over these thousands of watery words, we've listened in on clicking whales and crackling shrimp, fish that hum like tuning forks, ice that groans with ancient pressure, and even coral reefs that advertise their vitality through sound. Each of these voices, individual and ecosystem, geologic and animal, adds a note to the ocean's intricate, uninterrupted dialogue. It is not one message, it is millions, sent and received across wavelengths and species, flowing through water like thoughts moving across a sleeping mind. And yet, for most of human history, we mistook the sea for silence. We saw it shimmer, felt its spray, maybe feared its storms, but we did not listen, not really. Not to the way sound blooms under pressure, or how creatures weave language out of echoes, or how entire communities remember themselves through rhythmic exchange. The ocean's acoustics were background hum, static under the narrative of fish counts and currents, until, quietly, we began to tune in. And now we know, sound is not a layer on the ocean, it is the ocean. From the first snapping shrimp to the last infrasonic whale call echoing off the continental shelf, marine life has evolved not just to survive within sound but through it. Fish school using sonic cues, larvae settle by homing in on reef symphonies, mothers and calves call to one another with exquisite precision across murky, crowded habitats. Even the boundaries of territories, invisible to us, are drawn in clicks and pulses and low-frequency rumble. Each of these signals carries more than information, they carry intention, identity, belonging. When a sperm whale clicks in coda, it is not just locating prey, it is naming itself among its kin. When a humpback male sings his ever-evolving refrain, he is composing history, a living record passed from one season to the next. When reef fish chorus at sunset, they are marking time, not with a clock, but with voice. And when a drifting larval fish hears the whisper of its future home, it is not responding to instinct alone, it is responding to memory. Our growing ability to listen, with hydrophones, algorithms, and perhaps most importantly, patience, has opened an entirely new dimension of marine science. No longer are we restricted to visual surveys or catch records. We can listen over days, weeks, decades. We can map migration, track recovery, even predict collapse, all through sound. But something else is happening too. As we listen to the ocean, we begin to reimagine our role within it, not as rulers or mere observers, but as neighbors, participants, co-tenants in a vast, reverberating polyphonic world. Because this acoustic conversation is not one we initiated. It began long before us, in the gill and the fin, in the tectonic shift and the calving ice. It's not waiting for our reply, but it does change when we enter the room. Our ships, our sonar, our seismic surveys, all add to the noise, sometimes drowning out the subtle ancient music beneath. Yet we are also capable of adding something else. Quiet, care, the technology to hear more gently, and the humility to recognize when to pause and simply receive. There is still much we do not understand. Why do blue whale calls keep getting deeper? How exactly do fish distinguish friend from foe by a few milliseconds of click timing? What unknown creature may lie behind those rhythmic pulses recorded far off the mid-Atlantic ridge? There are still silences whose meaning we have yet to fathom. But even silence, in the ocean, is not empty. It is filled with waiting, listening, breathing. We began this journey thinking about communication, how animals use sound to mate, to hunt, to navigate. But it ends somewhere deeper, in a recognition that sound is not just functional, it is relational. A coral reef's crackle is not just a status update, it's an invitation. A sperm whale's coda is not merely a clan code, it is a story. The ocean is not broadcasting for our entertainment, but it does not mind if we listen, as long as we listen well, and now that we have, it's hard to unhear. So as you walk along the shore next time, or sit near a harbor, or imagine the sweep of the sea under starlight, try this: close your eyes. Picture not the water's surface, but its interior, filled with clicks and pulses and ghostly bellows. Know that beneath your feet, a conversation is unfolding that has not ceased for millions of years. That each sound you hear is a voice, and each voice is a life, and each life is a line in the ocean's longest story. And maybe, just maybe, the best thing we can do is keep listening. Thank you for being here, for lending your ears and your heart to this deep and ancient soundscape. If you enjoyed this little journey into the secret life of sound in the sea, please consider leaving a like, subscribing, or leaving a comment. Sleep well, fellow traveler,